Artificial Frontier Podcast.
All right, buckle up, everybody, because we're diving into some pretty wild theories today.
Oh, it's going to be good.
Yeah, you guys have been sending in all sorts of stuff, articles and videos, and even a book excerpt.
A book excerpt?
Yeah, all about hip-hop and Satanism.
Oh, wow.
Apparently, some people are convinced there are rappers out there making deals with the devil.
I mean, I've heard some of those theories before.
Yeah, they've been floating around for a while, so we're going to explore this whole belief system.
Okay.
But just to be clear, we're not here to prove or disprove the existence of the devil. We're just trying to unpack the arguments and look at the supposed evidence and see what kind of impact these beliefs have on the music itself and the artists.
I'm curious to see what we find.
Me too.
It's interesting, it seems like every few years, these types of accusations pop up around different cultural trends.
Yeah, it's definitely not a new phenomenon.
Like, it's not just hip-hop, right?
Right. So we've got online articles, some YouTube videos, and even a piece from a book called Hip Hop from Hell.
Hip Hop from Hell, huh? Catchy title.
Yeah, very dramatic. To get a handle on all this, maybe we need a little history lesson.
Yeah, I think that's a great place to start. Hip-hop is definitely not the first genre to be accused of having demonic influence.
Yeah, I know. Tell me about it.
I mean, these ideas, you can actually trace them all the way back to a group called the Bavarian Illuminati.
The Illuminati?
Yeah, they were formed way back in 1776.
Wow, that's a long time ago. Weren't they around for, a hot minute, though? Didn't they disappear pretty quickly?
Yeah, they were only active for about 9 years. Originally, they were just a group of intellectuals who supported reason and science and opposed the control the clergy had over knowledge. But over time, their image got, totally twisted.
Okay.
They became associated with all these conspiracy theories. They went from being, rational thinkers to a shadowy secret society controlling global events, the whole lizard people and the Vatican and all that.
Oh, yeah, all those wild theories.
Right.
So how did this historical group get linked to hip-hop?
It's the distorted version of the Illuminati that really got attached to hip-hop.
Okay.
The Illuminati is this powerful, shadowy organization. And this really took off in the 1990s, particularly.
The 90s, that makes sense.
Artists like Jay-Z and Kanye West became major targets of those accusations.
Yeah, I can see that.
And it really makes you wonder, why are these accusations so persistent?
Yeah.
And why hip-hop specifically?
It's a good question.
What does that say about how this genre and its artists are perceived by, society?
And maybe about the people who are making these accusations.
Right, exactly. As we delve deeper into the evidence you guys have sent in, I think it's really important to keep that broader cultural context in mind.
Absolutely. Okay, so let's get into the specifics. What kind of evidence are people using to back up these claims of Satanism in hip-hop?
Well, your sources highlight a few different types of evidence.
Like what?
Well, there are those who connect real-life events, like tragedies, to satanic rituals.
Ooh, that's interesting.
For example, that YouTube channel World Symbolism X that you sent in.
Yeah.
They link tragedies like 9/11, the deaths of Aaliyah, Tupac, and Michael Jackson.
Oh, wow.
They link those to sacrifices made for fame and success.
Wow. Those are some pretty serious accusations.
Yeah, pretty heavy stuff.
Is there any other so-called evidence from the music itself?
Oh, yeah. Some sources focus on specific lyrics and imagery.
Okay.
For example, one of the articles you shared mentions Jay-Z's song Lucifer.
Oh, Lucifer.
And a line from Empire State of Mind, Jesus can't save you. Life starts when the church ends. They're pointing to these as evidence of satanic ties.
It's interesting how a single line from a song can be interpreted in so many different ways.
Right. It really highlights the tension between artistic expression
Yeah.
and, the potential for those expressions to be completely misinterpreted.
Especially when you're dealing with really sensitive themes.
Exactly. And it's not just mainstream artists that are under scrutiny.
Oh, really?
The book Hip Hop from Hell criticizes even Christian hip-hop artists like Out of Eden and Gospel Gangstas
Oh, wow.
for their style of music and dress, claiming they're worldly and serving the devil.
So even within Christian hip-hop, there are differing opinions on what's considered acceptable.
Yeah, that's right.
What's the basis for those critiques?
Well, the author of Hip Hop from Hell seems to believe that the music itself, regardless of the lyrics, is inherently demonic and clashes with Christianity.
Okay.
They argue for, a complete separation from secular culture.
That seems like it kind of ignores the potential for Christian rappers to reach audiences who wouldn't normally listen to gospel music?
It definitely raises some questions about how different groups define the boundaries between faith and artistic expression.
Yeah, it gets tricky.
It does. It gets even more complex when you consider artists who seem to intentionally use satanic imagery.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Like Lil Uzi Vert or Tyler, the Creator.
They haven't shied away from that at all.
No, they've openly embraced it. And often they seem to almost capitalize on the controversy it creates.
There was that whole thing with Lil Uzi Vert supposedly telling fans they were going to hell with him if they listened to his music.
Oh, right.
And Lil Nas X and those Satan shoes with the real blood.
Oh, yeah. Those were pretty wild.
So we've got artists who are accused despite their denials, and then we've got artists who seem to intentionally stir up controversy. It's a whole spectrum.
It is. It's a really fascinating spectrum. As we move forward, I think it's super important to keep in mind the various perspectives and interpretations at play here.
Right. This is definitely not a simple good versus evil situation.
Not at all.
So when we see this devil imagery, is it always a literal endorsement of Satanism? Or could it be something else entirely?
That's where the real analysis begins. There's a lot of room for interpretation.
I'm ready to unpack some of those interpretations.
Me too.
Are you ready to dig into some alternative viewpoints?
Oh, yeah, let's do it.
We'll explore all that and more when we come back for part 2 of this deep dive.
Can't wait.
You know, as we were going through all those examples in part 1, I started thinking about the bigger picture.
Oh, yeah. Like what?
Well, it seems like these accusations of Satanism, they could be a way to dismiss hip-hop as a genre, especially considering its roots in Black culture.
That's a really interesting point. One of your sources actually addresses that directly. It's that article, Everything You Need to Know About the Secret Cult Ruling Hip-Hop.
Yeah, that one was pretty intense.
It argues that the Illuminati theory, it's often used to explain away the success of Black artists.
Like, they couldn't possibly achieve fame and fortune on their own.
Right. It kind of plays into this narrative that undermines Black achievement, you know?
Yeah, like attributing their success to outside forces instead of their talent and hard work.
Exactly. And it really distracts from the real issues, like systemic oppression and the obstacles that Black artists face in the industry.
It's easier to blame some shadowy conspiracy than to acknowledge the talent and resilience of these artists.
It's a way to avoid engaging with the complexities of race and power in the music industry.
It's a lot easier to just say, oh, they sold their soul to the devil.
Right.
So we've got this layer of social and cultural critique happening. But what about the imagery itself? Beyond the Illuminati, there's all this other devil symbolism, horns, inverted crosses, pentagrams.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
How else can we interpret that?
This is where it gets really interesting. Remember, we're talking about art, which is inherently open to interpretation. There are so many different ways to understand this imagery.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Well, what interpretation is rebellion?
Rebellion.
Yeah, like a rebellion against societal norms.
Okay, I could see that.
Think about the traditional image of the devil. He's the ultimate rebel. He questions authority. He embraces individuality. And hip-hop, from its very beginning, has been a voice for the marginalized, a way to push back against those societal expectations.
Yeah, hip-hop was born out of struggle, the need to be heard. It makes sense that artists might use this devilish persona to say, like, we're not playing by your rules.
Exactly. And it's not just about rebelling against society as a whole. It can also be about rebelling against the constraints of the music industry itself.
Oh, yeah, good point. The music industry can be brutal.
It can be incredibly demanding, especially for young artists trying to break through.
I can only imagine.
There's this constant pressure to conform, to sell out, to compromise your artistic vision for commercial success. And sometimes aligning yourself with the devil, even symbolically, can be a way of saying, I'm doing things my way, even if it means facing backlash.
Yeah, it's like a big screw you to the people trying to control and exploit you.
Exactly. And then there's another layer to this. The exploration of darker emotions, personal demons.
Oh, let's unpack that a little bit.
Think about the traditional role of the devil. He's the tempter, right?
Yeah, he's always tempting people.
He preys on your vulnerabilities and weaknesses. He represents the things we try to keep hidden, the darker aspects of ourselves.
The stuff we don't want to admit to.
Right. And for artists who are really raw and honest in their music, exploring themes of pain, struggle, temptation, it makes sense that they might grapple with those darker forces, symbolically.
They're wrestling with their own demons.
Yes. And sometimes that means using provocative imagery to really convey the intensity of those struggles.
Like Kendrick Lamar in To Pimp a Butterfly.
Exactly. One of the articles you sent, How Hip-Hop is Fighting the Devil, talks about how Kendrick uses characters like Uncle Sam and Lucy as like these personifications of temptation and the pitfalls of fame.
He's showing how the system tries to commodify Black artists, dangling money and fame in front of them, but ultimately trying to strip them of their identity.
It's a really powerful commentary on the music industry's exploitative nature and how it can really prey on the vulnerabilities of young artists, especially those from marginalized communities.
It's like that saying, the devil's greatest trick is convincing the world he doesn't exist.
Well, I like that.
Evil isn't always this overt fire and brimstone thing. Sometimes it's insidious. It's subtle.
It's the allure of easy money and quick fame.
Yeah.
That promise of escaping your circumstances, even if it means compromising your values.
That theme of temptation is so prevalent in hip-hop.
It really is.
It's almost like a rite of passage.
For sure. Like, think about Big KRIT on his album Forever is a mighty long time. He really wrestles with that desire for material wealth, the price of fame, while trying to stay true to his faith and his roots.
He's looking for that deeper meaning.
Yes. And then there's Jay Electronica, who uses his music to really explore that conflict between faith and the temptations of the world.
He seems to see the devil as both an internal force and an external one.
That's a really insightful observation.
Existing within himself and within society.
It's a very nuanced approach, you know.
Yeah.
It acknowledges the complexities of good and evil and how those forces are often intertwined.
It's not always a clear-cut battle between the two.
Right.
Sometimes it's about choosing between two things that both seem good.
Exactly. It's about those difficult choices where you're torn between what you believe is right and what seems appealing in the moment.
That age-old struggle.
Exactly. And hip-hop artists, through their vulnerability and willingness to confront those internal conflicts, they really give voice to that universal human experience.
So we've talked about rebellion, exploring those darker emotions, the music industry's exploitative nature. Are there any other interpretations we should consider?
There's one more that's absolutely crucial: the potential for misinterpretation.
Right. We touched on that earlier with the Jay-Z lyrics being taken out of context.
Exactly. When you're dealing with really sensitive themes like religion and spirituality, there's always a risk of your words being twisted.
People might project their own fears and biases onto what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
That's one of the things that makes this whole conversation about hip-hop and Satanism so tricky.
Yeah.
We've seen artists who intentionally use satanic imagery. And we've seen artists who are accused despite their denials.
Right. And even when an artist deliberately uses that imagery, it doesn't automatically mean they're a devil worshiper.
Of course not. It could be a way to provoke a reaction, a commentary on society's hypocrisy, or simply a way to push artistic boundaries.
It's all about playing with archetypes and exploring different forms of expression.
Art is subjective. What one person finds offensive, another might find thought-provoking or even liberating.
So context and intent, they're super important.
Absolutely. We can't just take things at face value. We have to dig deeper, consider the artist's message, their background, their artistic choices.
And be aware of our own biases.
Yes. Are we dismissing hip-hop as inherently demonic because of preconceived notions about the genre or the culture it comes from?
Are we judging the music on its own merit, or are we judging it based on who's making it?
Those are really important questions to ask ourselves when we're engaging with any art form, especially when it challenges our comfort zones.
This deep dive is really making me think about things in a whole new way.
That's the beauty of critical thinking.
Yeah.
It allows us to move beyond those simplistic interpretations and really engage with the world in a more nuanced and thoughtful way.
We've covered a lot of ground with different interpretations, but what about the human cost of these accusations? How do they affect the artists?
Oh, that's a really important part of this conversation, and it's one that's often overlooked. These accusations, regardless of their validity, can have really serious real-world consequences.
Like what?
Well, they can damage reputations, alienate fans, even jeopardize careers.
Yeah, for sure.
And you actually sent in a few examples of that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you shared that video of T-Pain talking about the sacrifices he's had to make in his music career, both personal sacrifices and with his family.
Yeah, he talked about the difficulty of balancing a demanding career with having a family and how the industry can take a toll.
It really shows that even without the satanic element, there are inherent sacrifices involved in pursuing a music career.
Yeah. And those are probably amplified when you're facing these accusations of devil worship or being in the Illuminati.
Exactly. It adds another layer of scrutiny and suspicion on top of all those existing pressures.
And sometimes the consequences are much more severe.
That's true. Remember that interview with Professor Griff from Public Enemy?
Oh, yeah, that one was wild.
He claims his life was ruined because he spoke out against these forces he believes control the music industry.
He talked about being blacklisted and threatened, even having his house burned down.
Yeah, some really heavy stuff.
Whether or not you believe his claims, it just shows the potential risks of going against powerful interests, especially when those interests are shrouded in secrecy and conspiracy theories.
Exactly.
It seems like even if you're telling the truth, you risk being labeled paranoid or delusional.
It's a valid concern for sure. And then there's that video with Steve Polina alleging a plot to suppress Black-owned distribution companies.
Yeah, and he tied that to the sacrifices of artists like Aaliyah and Tupac.
It's a pretty disturbing theory that connects to a long history of exploitation and violence in the music industry.
Even if some of these stories seem outlandish, they still raise important questions about power in the industry and how that power impacts artists, especially Black artists.
Exactly. They remind us that even if we don't buy into the satanic panic, there are still real-world forces at play that can be just as harmful and destructive.
So we've covered so much ground in this deep dive. We talked about the history of the satanic panic, the different ways to look at that devil imagery in hip-hop. We even got into how these accusations can affect the artists themselves.
Yeah, it's been a pretty intense journey.
What are some of the key things you think people should take away from all this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that this whole issue is really complex. There's no one simple answer as to why some hip-hop artists use satanic imagery, and we really need to avoid those knee-jerk reactions, like just dismissing it as shock value or saying it's proof of devil worship.
So basically, don't jump to conclusions.
Right. We got to approach this with open minds, consider different viewpoints, and think about our own biases. It's also really important to remember that the music industry has its own power struggles and challenges, which can really impact artists, especially those from marginalized communities.
It's not just about the music, it's about the people making it and the struggles they face.
Exactly. In the end, it's really up to each listener to decide what they believe. But that decision should be based on a thoughtful understanding of all the evidence and a willingness to engage with different perspectives.
Even if we put aside the idea of a literal satanic influence, we've seen that the music industry is full of pressures and temptation.
Oh, for sure.
Artists face exploitation, greed, this constant pressure to compromise their values for success. Those are real demons they have to deal with.
Artificial Frontier Podcast.